Candice Scarborough. Welcome to the Chundria Show. How are you today?
I'm doing wonderful today. How about yourself?
Great, thank you so much. Where in the world are you at?
I'm located in Maryland, in a small town called Laurel, Maryland, which is probably about 20 minutes south of Baltimore, probably another 25 minutes north of DC. So,
Are you an East Coast girl through and through?
absolutely, I've been here my entire life. I love to travel, so I love to travel and go West Coast and go all over the place, but I always want to be East Coast for home. Always want to call that home.
Oh, awesome, awesome. All right, let's chat about you today. So I know you're the director of cybersecurity and software engineering. Kudos to you. And
Thank
your
you.
career spans, like I said, cybersecurity, software engineering, and then also tech leadership, which are like three really demanding spaces. And I'm assuming they're three still very male-dominated spaces. Is it? Yes.
Absolutely.
Okay. So I'm curious, what initially drew you into this field?
People would ask me this question. I would say, I've always known that I wanted to be in tech and cybersecurity. And so immediately when I started applying to schools, I said, computer science, that's what I want to do. And that's always been my interest. It wasn't until a few years ago I started kind of working through this workshop that I do, which is breaking down your origin story because to help you find kind of your why. And I realized my journey in tech started when I was very young. My mom is a single mom, and so she spent a lot of time. She worked for back then it was cable companies. She worked for TCI, which is a predecessor to AT&T, predecessor to Comcast, right? So back when pay-per-view was like new and the hot thing. And when my mom had to like be on call for pay-per-view runnings, like normally it was like boxing fights and matches like that, I would go into work with her. And I remember one year was the Evander Holyfield fight and everything was down. All the pay-per-view channels were down. Nothing was working. And my mom is like, it's, a midnight. We're trying to get pay-per-view back up because the title fight's about to start. She's freaking out. And I'm in the office with her and she's running back to the mainframes and she's having me like type, commands on the command line. And then I'm running to the other room to see if the pay-per-view's up. And I realized my tech journey began when I was really young, kind of in the trenches with my mom, kind of helping her navigate new technology and innovation. And I realized even at that age, when I was around 10 years old, I had this idea for like, I love solving problems, I love finding creative solutions. And in that moment, I remember being in that room with her, and it was so much fun, like troubleshooting the issues. And so ultimately, when it was time for me to go into college, I just said, hands down, I want to be, a technologist. I want to solve hard tech problems. And that's where the journey began. My career has taken so many twists and turns over the years. One of the things I'll say is that every problem I approach with curiosity. And I try to leave things better than I found them. And I think that's what's kind of led my tech journey, right? Going to different jobs and going to different companies and saying, this is an interesting problem. This is a space that I want to affect change in. I'm super curious. How can I help? And that's how my entire tech journey has kind of navigated over the years from, being a junior software engineer to eventually being what is now a tech director where I have multiple teams that function underneath me.
Wow, well, kudos to you. Congrats to you. I mean, what I love about that story is that you kind of had that spark early on, and shout out to your mom for like, you know, even being an example for you, But then also deep in like in your innate power, like you were drawn to it, like like a moth to a flame, because you could have been in the corner, like, oh my God, can we go? Like, can I go home? Can I stay home? But you were trying to support mom, which shows like the beauty of your relationship with your mom. But then also secondarily, like something happened, something that day shifted for you. It sounds like, and you were drawn to the resolution part of it, But then the tech part of it is a really big part of it as well. Like we're dating ourselves talking about some pay per view fights, But but that's also a testament that you've been around to watch technology evolve over and over and over. Technology's evolved even from 5 years ago, So if we're talking about decades ago, I think that's really, really spirited of you to like draw on that experience that you had with your mom and like recall that spark that you first had, and we talk a lot about inclusion in tech, right? And there are companies that are actively building more inclusive teams across their organizations, correct? But what does inclusive innovation look like to you in action? Because you've been a part of the evolution of it. So what does inclusivity look like in technology in the culture?
I think, and over the years it's changed drastically. But like given one example right now where we are trying to really figure out who we are as a culture in the awakening of artificial intelligence and machine learning, right? We're in the middle of it. One thing that I tell people is that artificial intelligence and machine learning is dated, it's old, it's just the masses didn't have access to it at their fingertips like we do now with the chat GPTs and the bards and the Gemini. But like one of the things about inclusive innovation, right, is how do we bring a lot of voices to the table when we're deciding to build these platforms that are based on AI? How do we make sure that every person in the room is represented so that the AI isn't doing things that are inherently showing bias? Because AI models are built on the people that train them, on the data sets that train them. So if we're using biased data sets, then we're going to have biased solutions. We're going to have solutions that, I've worked in different spaces where, face detection solutions aren't great on people of color with, black and brown skin, right? So how do we make sure that we are using data sets that are inclusive? When we're training the models, are all ethnicities and races represented? When we're going through and doing compliance and checking the models to make sure that they're not doing something disproportionate or making judgments that are disproportionate based on biased data, how do we make sure that we have all, economical conditions represented, racial, ethnic, in our data sets and in our training? I remember distinctly working for, a banking system that was looking using AI and machine learning to look for fraudulent activity or fraudulent charges. And the models that were being used in that banking system in disproportionately identified low economic areas as areas that there appeared to be more fraudulent activity. And it wasn't because that was truly the case. It was because they had minimal data to train the models on. So how do we represent and how do we show, spending patterns for all people, not just people who are affluent and have more access to credit, right? So innovation and trying to build diversity in just means, in my standpoint, everyone should have a seat at the table. Everyone should discuss the security, the compliance, and there should be representations from all of the different factions of what we think of as diversity. So gender, ethnicity, race, age, people with disabilities, right? They all need a seat at the table when we're planning and building these systems so that there's not something that I overlook because I'm perfectly capable of walking. But if I had just included someone in there that had a physical disability, they would have seen all over the place red flags with the solution we were building. Things like that, making sure there's active representation when we're building.
Sure. You brought up a point, like platforms like ChatGPT and things like that. And it makes me think about how, like, we solve a problem, the technological advancement is created to solve a problem, and then it sometimes creates a new problem. Kind of like the
Absolutely.
boom of online banking, like it solved a problem where people don't want to go to the bank. People want to be able to access their money from wherever they are in the world. I want to make that transfer, that deposit. I don't want to go into the bank, and it
Yep.
solved the problem. But then you had the fraud alerts go up. You have people logging into your account and getting your account numbers out of your phone. And so it's just like we take these steps forward. And
Yep.
then sometimes it feels like we take two steps forward, and then I won't say we take two steps back, but it feels like we take a little step back, and then we have to recover from that. And so in just speaking with like about cybersecurity and innovation, and it's sometimes it seems like it's always clashing to me, but how can leaders like you balance that need for agility and creativity while you're managing risk?
I think the biggest thing is just to realize that even though something sounds like it's going to be a great solution, we have to look at it from all angles. Like you're saying, online banking, super convenient. It's convenient for those people who can't make it to the bank, who work, hours, banking hours where that's inside of their working hours, right? So we're opening up access, but then that access unfettered, like, makes it, an attack surface for us. So we have to balance that. So if we're going to give unlimited access, how do we make sure that we build more security and practices in place that we didn't think of before we had this online access? It's a delicate dance you have to do. So paired with every innovation idea is all the compliance and security requirements right there at the same time. It's not after the fact. It's not after we discover there's an issue or we've exposed something. It's while we're building it. We need to bring those people in, those risk experts in, and have them have a seat at the table that could say, wait, that sounds really good. But, if we're using, AI to process loan applications, where are our pitfalls? Where is the data going to be biased or lead to gaps? And how do we make sure that we don't open ourselves up for government sanctions because we're, disproportionately turning down applications for a socioeconomic set of people, right? Like, who is at the table when we build that? So it is a delicate balance. It's a very delicate dance, and you just have to build the right team around you that scrutinizes as much as they're going to encourage, the creativity and the ideas. We also need that same level of scrutiny on that idea.
Sure, I hear shared values and that mission are just as pertinent as all the technical, all the
Absolutely.
technical part of it, and representation matters, and you are a champion for elevating, more women and, you know, and other people of color, other professionals in STEM. What are some intentional ways that companies can create space and leadership pipelines for underrepresented voices, but namely for what you just said, like if there's bias in any part
Right.
of your innovative plan or your technological plan, if there's bias in it, we're gonna come back to the drawing board at some point. So how can we offset that and have our voices at the table?
I think it starts with building an inclusive workforce, right? I've worked for a lot of different companies over the years, plenty of, Fortune 500, some, defense and defense technology, some banking. I've even worked for some commercial big names too as well. And what I'll say is consistently, all of their hiring practices are geared toward what they call culture fit, right? And I rally very hard against the term culture fit. And I say we need to look for culture add, because when you're interviewing for culture fit, you're trying to streamline a process to get a certain type of person in the space, and you're throwing away all of the other, nuanced personalities and people because you want somebody that's going to, fit in the mold. And that's the problem, right? So we're bringing people into our organizations, but we're not looking for value add. We're looking for culture fit. So one of the things that I try to do is shake up the hiring practices, right? I like to remove names off of resumes. Even if corporately the company doesn't want to do that, I do that. Before I sit down with my team and have them go through a resume, I try to redact names. I try to redact what colleges or universities they went to, because, especially in the DMV area, if you say certain schools, we know that might be an HBCU, or we know that's definitely not an HBCU. And so we can say very distinct things about the candidate that is being interviewed because we know what school they went to, we know what year they graduated, and we know their name. And then I also look at, if we can redact a lot of that information and just look at the activities that they've done in their resume, that gets more people a seat at the interview table, right? But also, I'm a tech company, and tech companies love to do we're going to have, 3 rounds of interviews. One's going to be, behavioral. Another one's going to be a coding test. Not everybody interviews the same way, right? And if you want inclusivity, you can't have one metric for measuring how somebody gets through that interview. They can't ace every single part of it because you're selecting for a very specific type of person who can get through behavioral, who can get through coding tests, all the things, right? You have to look at mixing and matching what's the style for that individual to bring out the best in that person. And I think you start there. I think you start with how do you build your pipeline? Because then if you make your hiring practices more diverse, you'll automatically have more diverse people in that room when it's time to start talking about innovation. But I think it has to definitely start there. I also think we need to look at how we're structuring, job requisitions using, language that leans very heavily, towards more aggressive or, certain language that will weed out people that might be more passive, right? What's wrong with being a passive personality? What's wrong with being someone who likes to build consensus? Right. But the way our recs read is like, we want somebody who's aggressive and can work in high, paced environments and all these things. And you're going to weed out automatically the consensus builder or the person who likes to collaborate. Well, sometimes we need that. We don't need a bunch of aggressive people in one room arguing about a tech solution. We need someone that's going to be creative with their delivery and how they build consensus. So I think it starts there, short answer, in terms of how we start to build the pipeline. And then once we get people in that are diverse, I think we need to really foster keeping them in, right? And retaining those people and not just being like, oh, great, you're here, figure it out, right? Building mentorship, building advocacy for those voices that are not the traditional culture fit. They were the culture ad, right? How do we make sure the culture ad doesn't leave the company because now they're here in the space doesn't foster their creativity and doesn't foster their inclusion. And I think that's where it starts, the people, building the right people around your organization so that they can thrive.
Sure. It seems like the hiring process is like a 360 loop, and it feels like if you leave one part out, I mean, you'll end up kind of regretting it because if like you said, if you're doing, we need somebody that's aggressive, somebody that's boots on the ground, somebody
Mm-hmm.
that works independently, but the nature of the job is actually collaborative,
Right.
So it's almost like one-sided, or it's not accurate.
Correct. It is not accurate.
So then here I am with my pristine resume, like, oh yes, I am a self-starter. I'm an independent, person. And then I find out, or I get kicked out of the interview process because one of the questions is about how I collaborate. But the
Right.
job says you needed somebody that was an independent thinker. The job ad wants an independent thinker, but the actual job needs somebody that can work together, that can collaborate. And so I think that's really interesting. And you raised some really great points today. And I know you've had long-term success, like in this fast-moving industry. And I'm glad to see you in it, like having you as an example. What advice would you give to anyone watching that wants to build a career in tech? Do they need that? Do they need certain degrees or certs? I know tech is so broad, and I know you have to kind of figure out which lane you
Right.
want to go in. But could you share a part of your story or a part of your experience, or in retrospect, what you would advise someone to do today in 2025?
Yeah. So this one, I've gone back and forth with, my thoughts over the years because I personally don't believe you need to have a degree to be a technologist, right? There's so much access to information and there's so much, a wealth of knowledge out there that people can self-teach and self-train themselves. But I have found over the years, companies have ebbed and flowed as to whether or not they're going to enforce things like bachelor degree requirements. So I would say, understand first kind of what lane you want to be in. If you want to be, on the defense side of tech and you want to go be a senior solutions architect, then most of those job roles are going to require some type of bachelor's degree, some type of military service that you've served, something that demonstrates that you've worked in the field in lieu of a degree. So then you do have to decide, am I going to sign up for the 2-year path or the 4-year path? There's other opportunities. A lot of the commercial companies have relaxed their degree requirements, right? So some of them are just like, if you can interview and you can pass the interview, then it's good enough for me. So you kind of have to figure out what lane you want to live in and what lane you want to try. And then you start there and making sure that you understand what are going to be the requirements for that role. What is coming with when these interviewers are looking to hire you for that role? Are they looking for bachelor's degrees or are they saying in lieu of a degree, 4 or 5 years of help desk experience is in lieu of a degree? So you really have to understand the role you want to get into. But another part of me says, I think before when I was in college and I was coming out of college, I worried so much about picking the right role coming out of college. And I actually talked to one of the interns today, and they were asking me all these questions about a program that's in my company. And I said, well, just pick one, because at the end of the day, your journey is not going to be linear. My journey was not linear. I learned things by trial and error. I learned things by failing, right? I picked jobs that I was in one job once that it was a role, I hated it. And I knew from then on, never will I go out for this type of role. But I had to go out and experience that role and take that opportunity to ever understand that that wasn't the lane that I lived in or desired to live in. And so I think one of the things that I tell people is, try not to get too bent on picking the right role, and more be open to exploring, be open to your career taking twists and turns and people presenting opportunities to you that may not have been something that was on your original path or your original plan, but being open to it, because tech is so fluid. When I started 20 years ago, I came in and said, I want to be a C++ developer, because at that time, that's what was hot, right? Like that's what was, things were still being very much built in either C++ or Java. Now today, we're on frameworks, we're on JavaScript frameworks. There's a lot of like Splunk and other development that's happening that C++ is old news. So if you hang on to one thing or one technology too tightly, you kind of will make yourself kind of obsolete. So being willing to learn, being willing to adjust, being willing to try things, that's going to be the key to a successful tech career more than anything is, can I go learn a technology and become proficient with it and then use it to build a solution? Because the technology you learned 10 years ago may not be the technology that you use most actively 10 years later. So those are like the pieces of advice that I'd give to technologists who are interested in getting into the space. Kind of know where you want to start so you can look at what those requirements look like so it can help you define a plan, but also don't get too stuck in one path or one plan, because seldom does the career actually follow that original path or plan. Once you're in your new job, you might be like, oh, that looks fun. I want to go try that. But you wouldn't know until you took that first role.
Thank you for your transparency on that. I mean, I think there's power in the pivot,
Yep.
and also being flexible is kind of the theme I hear from you too, because like you said, programs, technology, they can either become obsolete or they can advance. And what's the
Yep.
hot program now may not be the hot program in 5 years from now. And you want to show that you're ahead of the curve, you're keeping up with the trend. So that does require a great deal of knowledge, continuous learning. Like you didn't learn that program, you're not. I got this degree. There's
Right.
nothing else for me to learn. But like always being a student, that's a big takeaway. And I've learned a lot from you today, and I'm so excited that we've had this conversation. And as we wrap up today, Candice, I would love to do a quick little lightning round if you don't mind.
Okay.
Okay. First
Yeah.
question: if you're packing for a solo getaway, where would you go today?
I would say Bali would be the place that I'd go. I've been to Bali one time before. It was magical, amazing experience, and I could do it alone. So,
Okay. A hobby or skill you'd love to start?
oh, that's tough. There's so. I'm still very fearful of the water, so my hobby that I want is to start swimming as a hobby.
So you can swim in Bali when you go back there for your
Exactly.
summer.
Exactly.
Okay. What's your go-to karaoke song or music genre?
I'm a big like Notorious B.I.G. fan. So whenever karaoke, we go to karaoke a lot. I never sing R&B songs, but I will
You're up
rap
there rapping and
any.
flowing.
Yeah, I will rap any Biggie or Little Kim song for my
Okay.
karaoke choice.
I
So
love it. Let me find out. Candace is rapping in these streets.
my favorite.
Okay. Who is the funniest person you know?
Oh, that's so tough. I think it's gonna be. Oh, that's really bad. My best friend. I know my husband will want me to say it's him, but I think my best friend is the funniest person I know. She can make me laugh just being her normal self and not even doesn't even have to try.
All right, hubby. You got your close second. That's good.
Yeah.
All righty. Biggest leadership lesson you've learned the hard way.
Ooh. I think one of the lessons that I learned is to not always have to be the consensus builder. I used to be the consensus builder in the space that I'm in, because I do want everyone to buy in to the final solution. I want everyone to feel a part of it. But sometimes as the leader, you have to make the tough decisions. You have to make the tough calls and be definitive about it. And that was the hardest lesson that I had to learn, making a mistake of not being more definitive and not making the choice earlier in the process of something we were building.
Very, very fair. All righty. 2 more to go. In one word, what's your leadership superpower?
I think my leadership superpower is my ability to learn my people and kind of understand their unique and individual needs. So I spend a lot of time cultivating relationships and knowing a lot of details about each of my team, each member of my team. And even now on a team of 100 people, I try to meet regularly with 100 people, on a regular basis. So I try to do it quarterly, because I want to have that face-to-face interaction to know people on a work personal level. Not, I don't necessarily need to know all your business, but on a work level, I need to know what makes you tick, what makes a day where you want to come in and you want to be here, and what will make you happy for your future endeavors. And so I think that's my superpower, is being able to retain information about people and actually caring to know about everyone that is working in the environment.
So you remember the dog's name, the kid's name, the birthdays?
For the most part. Every now and again I'll forget something, but for the most part. People are shocked sometimes where I show up and I know it's your birthday and you told me a year ago it was your birthday. So yeah.
Great memory. All right, last one. Finish this sentence. Tech is better when?
Ooh, I will say tech is better when you bring your whole authentic self to the table when you're building that technology.
That's a great answer. Candice Scarborough, I want to thank you for being my special guest on the Chundria Show today. You did it.
Thank you.
Brave through it. I appreciate the extra time. It's been great chatting with you today. If anyone is interested in following your journey on socials, maybe getting a little inspiration from you, are you available for coaching or one-on-one, or you have any workshops or anything coming up, feel free to shout that out and share that out and let us know how we can stay in touch with everything you have going on.
Absolutely. So if people want to reach me online, you can go to www.createwithcandice.com. And that is the one-stop shop for you to be able to reach out to me if you do want one-on-one coaching. I do offer, CTO as a service. So people who are building tech startups or startups, period. It doesn't have to be a tech startup, but we all know there's a tech arm, a part of every business, right? And so if you need help kind of navigating, what your new business might look like, reach out to me there. I also have a podcast called Glitch, Grind, Glow. You can find me on YouTube. It's Glitch, Grind, Glow again. And the website for the podcast is www.glitchgrindglow.com. And you can reach out to me there and drop comments on the YouTube videos. I love when people interact and talk on those. So there's a tons of ways to find me. And I do say, if you have a question, a comment, something you want to discuss, just reach out, because I'm so open to having conversations. This is, what I live, breathe, and love.
Yay.